We now come to the backbench motion on Lesbian Visibility Week. Kate Osborne to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this House has considered the importance of Lesbian Visibility Week and believes that LGBTQIA+ women and non-binary people should be recognised for the work they do and the joy they bring. Lesbian Visibility Week was founded in 2019 by my good friend and publisher of Diva magazine, Linda Riley, and I'm delighted to welcome Linda to the House today. For the past 5 years, we have set aside this week in April to celebrate and uplift lesbians everywhere, from all backgrounds and all walks of life. And we are a community that grows stronger each and every year for it. 40 years ago, this year, I took my mum to see the Rocky Horror Show, and at dinner I told her that I was a lesbian. I distinctly remember her response of, yeah, and of course she already knew. And as my colleague yesterday pointed out, if I was ever in the closet, then the closet must have made of glass. I was incredibly lucky to have friends and family to lean on when I faced and overcame the many barriers that most lesbians have to deal with. As sadly, it is still the case that for so many, this support is just not there. But that doesn't mean my journey was easy. Dealing with coming out, the stigma at the time, the people our community were losing and not talking about, the feeling of loneliness and isolation led me to move to Newcastle in 1989. And until I was elected to represent my wonderful Jarrow constituency in 2019, I barely came back to London. To see so many people this week celebrating and recognising Lesbian Visibility Week gives me hope that this and future generations of lesbians will be accepted. And that is thanks to those that came before us, paving the way. I hosted a reception in Parliament on Monday night in partnership with Diva magazine and the LGBT Foundation, which had an incredible turnout from activists, campaigning organisations, members of this House and members of the other House. And I'm so grateful that so many friends and colleagues joined us at our first ever parliamentary reception. I think it's the most lesbians that we've ever had in Parliament at any one time, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the event, we heard about the media narrative that lesbians are disappearing, but we're not. We are in our ascendancy, with more lesbians than ever. The number of women who identify as lesbian has increased by 64% since 2014. Instead of being erased, we are multiplying. As many of you will know, I've dedicated most of my political career to campaigning for LGBTQIA+ equality. My first political activism was campaigning against Section 28 and highlighting the damage that it did and continues to do to our community. From campaigning against Section 28 to stop LGBTQIA+ people from being forced to hide, to holding a debate on lesbian visibility is in the gayest parliament in the world is some feat and something that an 18-year-old me could never have imagined. However, I also couldn't imagine that 40 years later I'd still be challenging the same homophobic language, including comments about LGBTQIA+ people being a danger to children. And it has to be said that the slurs currently being thrown against the trans community and at me for being supportive of the trans community are a carbon copy of the hate that we faced in the 80s. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does my honourable friend agree with me, and she's making an incredible speech today, that hate is hate? And some of the hate that we hear in the rooms reminds me of the hate that my parents heard when they were being subjected to vile racist abuse. Hate is hate. Does my honourable friend agree with me?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. And yes, hate is hate and unacceptable in any form. And we defeated it then, and we will defeat this hate and discrimination now. But back to my coming out. Even with a supportive family, when I came out, lesbian was still a dirty word, a word thrown at me in school in a derogatory way. If you were a lesbian, you were seen as unnatural. You were chased out of girls' bathrooms, something that still has happened to me in recent years. And you were sexualised by men far older than you, something that lesbians still face today. It was 10 years after I came out that I bought the first copy of a magazine called Diva. There was nothing like it at the time. There was nothing for my generation that helped lesbians feel included, and that magazine helped me feel less alone. That was 30 years ago. So happy birthday, Diva, and thank you. In the last 30 years, Diva has been a lifeline for many women, and it was Diva and Linda Riley that launched Lesbian Visibility Week. Diva is much more than a magazine. As they tell us, they are a movement. Diva have an annual power list, and for the first time in 2024, I've made it. So from that young, lonely lesbian 30 years ago buying my first copy to being included on that list has made me feel honoured and deeply grateful. It's a privilege to be named alongside colleagues and other brilliant activists, including the honourable members from Livingstone, Nottingham East and Paisley in Renfrewshire South. Today I feel proud to see so many LGBTQII+ women basking in the freedom to explore their sexuality in ways many women couldn't only a few years ago.
Would the honourable member give way?
I will.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and she's reminded me of a thought that I had and something I felt very strongly at the time of the same-sex marriage bill going through. I had a young daughter, and I felt that if I had two daughters, and one was straight and one was a lesbian, I would want them to have the same quality of life, the same protection of the law, and the same right to love whoever they wanted. Does the honourable lady feel that we have made progress towards the situation that that would now be the case?
I thank the honourable lady for her comments, her remarks. And unfortunately, I would have to say that we've gone backwards in recent times. I thought that we would be further forward than we are if I, look back some years ago, but I'm afraid that isn't the case. Weeks like this really matter. They show solidarity, they enable us to support each other and help us to celebrate our differences, embracing the whole LGBTQIA+ community. Too often, people seek to divide us, but as the theme of this Lesbian Visibility Week shows, we are unified, not uniform. We are here to be fabulous in our differences and to be seen, to let others know they can be their true selves. We have to use our own experiences to help people and use our platforms to give LGBTQIA+ people spaces. And that's what Lesbian Visibility Week is about, and that is why I'm holding this debate. It's an often used expression that we stand on the shoulders of giants, but we do. And I want to honour just a few of the wonderful women who have given so much to our community and have been inspirational to me and so many others. In the 1970s, Maureen Cahoon made history by becoming the first openly out lesbian in Parliament. Her courageous act in the face of media hostility has meant that so many of us today can stand in this chamber and follow in her footsteps. My colleague and good friend, the Honourable Member for Wallasey, is an iconic lesbian in Parliament. The first to come out in office, now a dame of course. She's a role model to many, breaking down barriers as the first lesbian minister and always fighting for equality, using her platform to stand up for our community. Of course, there are always brilliant women who are the driving force behind so many political and campaigning movements. Lisa Power, one of the founding members of Stonewall in 1989. Like me, a volunteer at Lesbian and Gay Switchboard, Lisa has led a decade-long fight on behalf of people living with HIV. Women like the brilliant Sue Sanders, founder of LGBT+ History Month, and from the other house, the Baroness Barker, who led the first ever debate in the other place on lesbian, bisexual and transgender women's health, to historic queer trailblazers like Anne Lister and the fabulous representation of her by Saran Jones in Gentleman Jack. I was distraught when I found out Gentleman Jack would not be returning for a third season. For the first time, I really saw someone on TV who represented me. In fact, so much so that I was even told we looked alike. To which I responded, I wish. But I do love wearing a waistcoat. The wonderful Sophie Wald, a trailblazer for LGBTQIA+ rights. As an actress and model, Sophie Wald was one of the first high-profile women to come out as a lesbian in 1997. And the brilliant Phil Opoku, a wonderful campaigner and founder of UK Black Pride. Dame Kelly Holmes, a sports hero to us all, an icon who was instrumental in the fight to address the vile mistreatment of LGBTQIA+ veterans, as well as those still in the army, and now empowering women with her Athena Effect events. And of course, Linda Riley, one of my best friends, the founder of Lesbian Visibility Week and publisher of Diva magazine, a titan who has done so much for lesbians and who I know will do so much more in her lifetime. And not forgetting another good friend, Nancy Kelly, who's also here today. Nancy has recently been appointed the Director of Lesbian Visibility Week. She's already been a trailblazer as Chief Executive of Stonewall and an award-winning human rights and social justice campaigner, a champion of LGBTQIA+ rights who always stands up for our community. So I'm excited to see what bigger and brighter things for Lesbian Visibility Week are next in the years to come. Whilst there's a lot to celebrate, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's important that we don't forget the challenges that lesbians still face. In fact, just this week, in celebrating Lesbian Visibility Week, I have faced some awful homophobic remarks on social media, simply for being open about my sexuality. I've been called a nonce, had threats on Twitter or X, and I receive a constant barrage of homophobic abuse. But homophobic abuse won't stop me from standing here or speaking up on behalf of my community. This toxic culture on social media and the toxic narrative at times from the government pushing their war on woke makes LGBTQIA+ people less safe. We've seen a rise in hate crime, and we must make active efforts to support our non-binary and trans community who still face unique day-to-day challenges for simply being themselves and loving who they love. Last October, I held a debate calling on the government to remove the additional financial burdens for same-sex couples who need to access IVF. In that debate, the Minister committed to a timetable to remove these barriers and bring forward a statutory instrument to end the postcode lottery for same-sex couples seeking IVF. So where is it? This legislation has still not materialised. Before qualifying for IVF on the NHS, same-sex female couples must fund 6 cycles of artificial insemination. And it comes as no surprise then that too often people are being priced out of starting a family. My constituents, Holly and Leanne, have had to choose between buying a house or having a baby. A decision couples should not ever be forced to make. They've been unable to afford IVF and are now, like so many, looking at alternative routes. And we need to see action. Many cannot wait any longer. Today we are told that young people are too woke, that it's fine for young LGBTQIA+ people when they come out. Yet the reality is often very different. When LGBTQIA+ children are twice as likely to be bullied, when young LGBTQIA+ people are still made homeless and kicked out when they come out, and when people do not feel safe where they live. The Albert Kennedy Trust reported that 77% of LGBTQ+ young people gave family rejection, abuse, or being asked to leave home as a cause for their homelessness. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm coming towards the end of my remarks. The DEVA survey in 2024 showed that less than a third of LBQ+ women and trans people in the UK feel safe where they live. To have this continue today is dystopian. Just yesterday, I asked the Deputy Prime Minister about IVF provision and pointed out that LGBTQIA+ community are being let down. His response was that the government have been excellent, that none of the lesbians, but I can tell you that none of the lesbians that I've spoken to so far this week think the government is excellent at anything. We must use our platforms and our ability to speak up, to highlight our diversity, to look at the impact of intersectionality, how the world is for lesbians of colour, for lesbians with disabilities, how the gender health gap and gender pay gap negatively impacts us all, but also impacts us differently, and also how privileged I am to be able to stand up in Parliament and say all this. Because in a third of countries across the world, including 64 UN member states, it's illegal to be LGBTQIA+. Until we have won equality for all people globally, then the fight goes on. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish everyone a happy and safe Lesbian Visibility Week.
Yeah, yeah.
The question is, as on the order paper, Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to congratulate my good friend from Jarrow for securing this debate and her excellent speech just now. At first, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thought, what am I going to say in this debate, because I'm not a lesbian, but then I've stood in this chamber and I've spoken on many issues, and the thing is, you don't have to be a lesbian to speak in this debate. What you have to be is a good person. You have to be a person that believes in equality and fairness, and that is what's important. And as my good friend has said, this Lesbian Visibility Week was created by, you know, a bestie of ours, Linda Riley, who's here today. And she has fought all of her life to be seen the way that allows her to be her, the way that allows her to be her authentic self. And what she wants more than anything is for everybody else to have that same privilege. Yesterday, we watched a documentary called The Life of Riley. And as an activist and a butch lesbian, Linda has supported everybody in the LGBTQI+ community. And she can do that and support trans people, because the two things are not mutually exclusive. And, you know, I believe it's more important to know what is in people's hearts than what is in their pants. And I think we should be spending more time talking about what's in people's hearts, because nobody wants to erase lesbians. I mean, honestly, people should just try it. I mean, I feel sorry for them if they try. This debate just highlights that. And I remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, speaking to my honourable friend from Shanice, which I know that I said that wrong, but from South West Wales, and she spoke to me about when she was a teacher and her girlfriend was sick and she was unable to talk about this in her workplace because she wasn't out. That is something that we should all think very carefully about in regards to allowing people to be their authentic self. And another lesbian, Sally, who during Lesbian Visibility Week came out at work
and that stopped a lot of the men from coming on to her, which she was grateful for. But then also some other men who thought, oh, we'll give it a try, you know, and it's just like, get over it. Some women are lesbians, get over it. And the thing is that Linda sort of welcomes lesbians and makes them feel safe in her environment. And I watched how she has looked after people that my honourable friend mentioned earlier, like Kelly Holmes, who kept her sexuality secret because of her time in the army, and now she's an activist and an advocate, and now she's engaged to a wonderful, beautiful woman called Louise. And that is the power of allowing people to be their authentic self and just allowing them to live. The power of that means that you give them space. You give them space to grow and be happy. And to be honest, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't care who people love, as long as it's a legal love, like love who you like. I think the world would be a better place if there was more love. There's too much hate right now. And I just think we need more love in the world. And as my honourable friend said, some countries, you know, two consenting same-sex couples are not allowed to love each other. And that is wrong. And the thing is this, is that Linda talks about LGBT with the T, and the trans debate has been extremely toxic. And the debate in this House just last week made trans kids and trans adults feel like they don't exist. It made them feel like we wanted to erase them. And this is the mother of all parliaments. And we should not have debates in this place that makes people feel that they don't exist or that we want them to be erased. And I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, Dr. Kaz, who I spent a lot of time with speaking to her at the weekend, and I was very grateful for her time, she was given some advice not to travel on public transport because of her report. And this was before her report was published. And some people, including some members of Parliament in this House, try to imply that my contribution to this House contributed to that. And Dr. Kaz said that I can quote her and say that that is absolutely ridiculous. And I felt really hurt and offended by that, Madam Deputy Speaker, because that encouraged a pile on me over the weekend. And for those people that think that they can silence me for sticking up for marginalised groups or minoritized groups, you know, think again, because that's literally what I have been elected to do in this place, is to speak up for people, people who maybe cannot speak up for themselves. And I'm not going to stop. And there's people that are making things up about me. Just read my book, and I'm happy to give it a plug, A Purposeful Life, out in all good bookshops now. But it's very clear in my book why I am an activist and why I campaign the way that I do. And I want to end on this, and I talk about this in my book. The Equality Act 2010 and the Gender Recognition Act 2004 have no bearing on each other. So therefore, you can be a feminist, you can stick up for the rights of women, and you can also be a trans ally. And that, I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, shows the very best of humanity, and we all need a little bit more of that.
Thank you. Dame Neil Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a real privilege to be speaking in this debate, and I would like to congratulate my honourable friend for Jarrow for securing the debate and for her absolutely excellent opening speech, and thank our fantastic ally, my honourable friend from Brent Central, for all that she does and the very, very pertinent points that she makes about supporting the whole of the LGBT community and the work that she has done in standing up for trans people as well. And of course, I must not forget my honourable friend, the member for Wallasey, who is a really outstanding champion. Long before many of us were even in this place, she was flying the flag in a very lonely place at the time. It was a real privilege to be at the event that my honourable friend for Jarrow organised on Monday, and to meet Linda Riley, the publisher of Diva, and Professor Sue Sanders, the co-founder of the LGBT History Month. just to be among such people was such an honour for someone like me. And thinking back all those years, 30 years ago, to Diva magazine, it was quite a lifeline for people who were as isolated as we were in South West Wales, perhaps not knowing anybody else who was quite like us, certainly not wanting to be open about it, certainly being very worried about society's reaction. And I was at that time in a relationship with another woman, and at the time of Section 28, we were both teachers, and this was very inhibiting. And as I've raised before in this place and in Westminster Hall, it was a very difficult time, and a time when it was not easy to challenge the homophobic bullying which was going on then, which is still going on now. And I do thank all of those who were braver than I was and who came out sooner than I did. And it was a very strange... I give way.
I apologise to the House for intervening, but I've got to go with my wife to celebrate her 17 years as Chancellor of the University of Hull. The Honourable Lady is rightly talking about the bullying, the fear. There's been some of it more recently, and I started becoming conscious of some of the issues when Kathleen Stock in West Sussex was being bullied mercilessly. So I think we ought to be careful, and I'd try to put to the House, as I would if I'd been speaking, that two of the greatest events I've been to have been the LGB Alliance conference meetings, which were picketed by people who seemed to hate the people who were inside. They wouldn't come inside to listen, but they were shouting outside. And that kind of attitude is one which has echoes of what others have talked about.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I think as my honourable friend for Brent Central has said, I mean, there is a real need to approach things in a very calm and appropriate way, but to respect everybody for their different ways and their different manifestations of humanity. So if I may make some progress, I think what for me was very telling was the fact that I actually came out when my relationship broke up. It's almost impossible to hide grief. And this was a real irony if you think about it, because having spent quite some considerable time not being open and trying not to make it obvious that we were in a relationship, then when, if you like, we didn't need to have that hidden approach, I actually did come out, because it's incredibly difficult to explain to people why you're feeling in such a state of grief if you don't explain the relationship. And what was very interesting about that was very supportive friends that I had, which was great, but it was also, I felt quite shocked and surprised that some people had never guessed, and that really seemed very strange. I think we were more hidden than we understood because people didn't see lesbians, and that is the importance of this Lesbian Visibility Week. That perhaps because society is so male-dominated, perhaps because women are marginalised in many respects, perhaps because women are seen as more likely to be doing things together or holding hands or going on holiday together, we were actually not even noticed. And I think one of the important things about raising lesbian visibility is so that people can be their natural selves, but so that people also recognise that other people are being their natural selves. Yeah. And of course, that has, over the years, meant that women were perhaps not the subject of homophobic legislation, because in many ways it reflected the role of women as society was then. And that women were very marginalised, not seen, but that's part of perhaps the wider picture of where women were. But I do think that there have been workplace stereotypes, expectations about women having to dress in a certain way and women having to behave in a certain way towards heterosexual men, or being expected to do so. And when they don't, be that as lesbians or as heterosexual women, it can be interpreted negatively. And I think over the years, that has very often held lesbian women back. It's a form of discrimination, a form of stereotyping, which has had very pernicious results. And I don't think it's enough for us to hope that attitudes can change. Hope is not enough. We all have a responsibility to challenge, and we also have a responsibility to use our legislative powers to strengthen our challenging by legislation. And we were very proud as a Labour government from 97 to 2010 to do a number of very important things which helped LGBT rights, including, of course, ending the ban on LGBT people serving in our armed forces, ending discrimination against lesbian and gay partners for immigration purposes, and giving LGBT individuals and couples the right to adopt children. Of course, we scrapped Section 28, and that was very, very important for people like myself, but we also banned discrimination in the workplace and in vocational training with the introduction of the Employment Equality Sexual Orientation Regulations. We also included homophobia in the definition of hate crimes, and sadly we have seen a rise in hate crimes in recent years, and this again is something that I would really draw the government's attention to, and particularly ask that more should be done to tackle homophobic, including transphobic hate crime. Of course, we created civil partnerships, and we awarded statutory rights for fertility treatment for lesbians on the NHS. But as my honourable friend has pointed out, there is a long way to go in terms of equal access and fair access. And I do hope that the Minister is listening to what she has said today, what she said yesterday to the Deputy Prime Minister, and that progress could be made on this sooner rather than later. So returning to the situation that we are in currently, although we have made progress, we do know that in many respects there is a lot to do. There's a lot to do to stop attitudes regressing in this country, but also on the international front. Many countries where women are hardly noticed or recognised, and if they are, they're certainly not allowed to be in heterosexual relationship, in same-sex relationships. So, on that note, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to again thank my honourable friend for securing this debate, and say that I hope that I can play my part with others in this House to secure greater lesbian visibility. Thank you.
SNP spokesperson Joanna.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Lesbian Visibility Week should be about lesbians, but the website put up for this week says it's about the power, or celebrating the power of sisterhood by uplifting incredible LGBTQIA women and non-binary people. And I think it's a real shame that in the week about our visibility, the lesbian identity is being subsumed into a number of other identities which have nothing to do with being a same-sex attracted woman. Many lesbians fundamentally disagree with this, and I want to speak up for them today. They need someone to speak up for them. It's a mark of how marginalised lesbians have become in our society that so few honourable members have turned up today. That's the reason I'm speaking from the SNP front bench, despite having been removed from it several years ago, partly for being the wrong sort of lesbian and one who doesn't believe that the rights of men who say they are women should trump those of lesbians. Before I go any further, I want to declare an interest as a supporter of LGB Alliance and a member of the advisory boards of both the Lesbian Project and Sex Matters. But my main interest in this issue is that I am a lesbian. I came out in the 80s when homophobia and lesbophobia were still rife across the UK, and my first activism was against Clause 28. In those times, like many other lesbians, I was physically assaulted in the street for being a lesbian and mocked. And lesbians of my generation also faced losing our jobs and our children. For a long time, we thought lesbophobia had gone. But lesbophobia is back, and it has been created by those who think the rights of lesbians are conditional on them accepting gender identity ideology. They are not. Lesbians are same-sex attracted women, and we are protected on that basis from discrimination, bullying and harassment under the Equality Act, where our protected characteristic is sexual orientation. Our protection is on the basis of our sex, not our gender, and as J.K. Rowling has said, without sex, there can be no same-sex attraction. That is why lesbians like me fight the replacement of the biological reality of sex with the nebulous concept of gender. Now, a moment ago, I used the phrase that the rights of lesbians are not conditional on accepting gender identity theory. That's a direct quote from my friend Alison Bailey. As some members will know, Alison Bailey is a black lesbian barrister who nearly lost her job for standing up for the rights of lesbians. Other lesbians have faced similar persecution. My friends Kate Harris, Bev Jackson and Eileen Gallagher had to fight a lengthy court battle to protect their charity, LGB Alliance, from being removed from the charitable register as a result of malicious legal action. Justice prevailed and they won the case, but shamefully, those who sought to destroy a charity run by lesbians for lesbians included members of this House. And it wasn't the first time that members of this House have displayed hostility towards lesbians. As the Father of the House said a moment ago, when I was invited to speak on a cross-party panel at the first LGB Alliance conference back in October 2021, I faced the challenge of crossing a picket line which included a heterosexual female MP who, together with self-styled trans rights activists, was protesting against the rights of lesbians to organise a conference to talk about lesbian and gay rights. Just let that sink in. That's where we've got to. Heterosexuals telling lesbians that we can't hold a conference. Now, there are many lesbians who have been persecuted for refusing to bend their knee to gender identity ideology. Some have faced losing their jobs and their livelihoods, and some have also faced violence or the threats of violence. And I want to just name a few of them this afternoon. All of them are or have become my friends as a result of our struggle. Lucy Massoud, Professor Kathleen Stock, Julie Bindle, Professor Joe Phoenix, and my dear friend Dr. Shireen Benjamin, a Labour activist who has been treated appallingly by the University of Edinburgh. There are many other lesbians whose lives have been severely restricted by gender identity zealots. We're not allowed to have lesbian-only social events. The only venues left for lesbians say they are inclusive, and that means men are included. Women's sports are also now inclusive, which means that they include men, while excluding lesbians who want to play on women-only teams. Recently, a lesbian coming to view democracy in action at the Scottish Parliament was told by security that she could not enter the building wearing a small pin badge reading Scottish lesbians. I'm wearing that same badge today in solidarity with Scottish lesbians who are an excellent grassroots lesbian collective. Across the United Kingdom, lesbians have been intimidated at pride marches, spat on and assaulted for simply asserting their rights to say that lesbians are same-sex attracted. And at a recent event for women in Edinburgh, men, counter-protesters, held up vile, abusive, lesbophobic signs. The police did nothing because for all the furore in Scotland about hate crime, it seems that hate directed at lesbians doesn't count. Now, I don't believe the interests of lesbians are being properly represented by organisations such as Stonewall and the organisers of Lesbian Visibility Week, because in their determination to promote gender identity ideology and to keep themselves in a job by doing that, not only do they fail to represent lesbians, but they actually promote lesbian invisibility and lesbian erasure. Madam Deputy Speaker, most people think it is absurd to say that a man can be a lesbian, and most people think it's absurd to say that lesbians have penises. And they are right, it is absurd. And I'm proud to be able to stand up in Lesbian Visibility Week in the House of Commons and say so. And I'm proud that I can stand up and speak for the lesbians who reject the forced teaming of lesbian with other groups that have completely different issues from us. Stop lumping us together with those other groups. It has the effect that our interests are obscured or overlooked altogether, and it renders us invisible. It's interesting to reflect on the fact that back in 2021, the Inclusive Britain report found that aggregate terms like BAME were no longer helpful and took no account of the differing needs and outcomes of those included under that umbrella, and that they should be dropped. And the findings of that report were adopted by the government, and the acronym BAME is no longer used in government. I and many other lesbians think the same principles should be applied to acronyms like LGBTQIA+, so that lesbians are not force-teamed with other identities. Now, yes, of course.
Very quickly.
The Honourable Lady. And actually reflecting on the speech we heard earlier from my friend, Honourable Member for Brent Central, what we could all benefit from in this debate is a little bit more love and compassion, and anybody that is setting out to do anything other than demonstrate love to people that do or think differently, then perhaps they need to think again.
Well, yes. But there also has to be room for difference, and there has to be room for someone such as me to speak up on behalf of some lesbians who feel the way that I do. And we're quite large in number. I don't pretend to speak for all lesbians, but none of the other lesbians in this house speak for all lesbians. Either. I am putting forward what I consider to be a valid viewpoint. Most importantly, it is a viewpoint that is backed by the law of this land. Now, I'm constrained by not having as much time as I would have liked. I would have liked to have talked about the CAST report. I would have liked to have talked about how the CAST report has identified that a large percentage of the girls presenting with gender dysphoria are same-sex attracted young women. And I would like to have time to talk about how important it is that we don't shut down holistic talking therapy for such young women. But I'm going to bring my comments to a close now by saying this. In my belief, in the view of many lesbians and in the eyes of the law, a lesbian is a woman whose sexual orientation is towards other women. Those who think lesbians include men are deluded. You cannot be a responsible lawmaker if you believe that any man can be a woman just by saying so. That's an old joke, worthy of the worst nights in student union bars back in my youth, with drunk testosterone-fueled men telling me and other lesbians that all we needed was the right man. In future, let's try and retain our grasp on what a lesbian is. Many lesbians are sick of being bossed about by all of those who promote their cult beliefs that gender trumps sex. It doesn't, it never has, and it never will.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Jarrow, for securing this debate today, the very first debate on Lesbian Visibility Week in parliamentary time, and congratulate her on her inclusion in the DIVA 2024 Power List. Her sharing of her coming out story today was generous and powerful. She also reminded us of all the trailblazers and giants upon whose shoulders we stand. And she talked about the homophobic abuse that she faces on a daily basis, and I applaud her for her courage and insistence that she will not be silenced. My honourable friend for Brent Central talked about the importance of everyone being able to be their authentic selves. And I was really struck by my honourable friend from Llanelli, who talked about how, as lesbians, we have often been more hidden than she thought, because lesbians for so long were not noticed, not considered, marginalised, and not seen, even when we weren't hiding. And Lesbian Visibility Week, as has been said, was founded in 2020 by Linda Riley, publisher of Diva magazine. It's a global event that aims to celebrate LGBT plus women and non-binary people everywhere, and to increase lesbian visibility. And today is an opportunity for us to reflect upon the history of lesbian members of this place, to celebrate the progress that has been made to make Britain a better place to live as a lesbian, and to recognise the issues that our community still face and the progress still to be made. When I was young, lesbian role models were few and far between. Being openly gay was just not something that was present in the public psyche. I couldn't imagine a lesbian being able to exist, never mind be happy. And Lesbian Visibility Week is an opportunity for us to celebrate not only that we exist, but that we are a diverse community. We don't all look like each other. We don't all behave like each other. We don't all agree with each other. But more often than not, we can be united, but not uniform. And fundamentally, you can't tell by looking. It's a chance to usualise us, to show that lesbians are everywhere and not in niche, discrete communities. We're in workplaces, in communities, in schools, in churches, in temples, synagogues, mosques, in families, and yes, in Parliament too. How many times are lesbians expected to blend in, to keep our heads down and not make a point of our sexuality and who we love? Without being visible, our identity is hidden. And when we are so hidden, it confirms assumptions that we are somehow shameful. And it's because of this that Lesbian Visibility Week is so important. We must be included for who we are, not for fitting in. And once no one looks twice at two women holding hands in public, once no one raises an eyebrow when your wife picks you up from work, when a child's teachers aren't surprised when two mothers arrive for parents' evening, and when people aren't looking at the clothes we wear or the length of our hair to decide whether or not we are lesbians, that's when lesbians are becoming equitable. Because it's not so much about being accepted as being expected. I want my being a lesbian to be unnoteworthy, not because no one has noticed, but because it is usual. Since today is the first debate in this place to celebrate Lesbian Visibility Week, it seems only right to recognise the first out lesbian member of this place. Maureen Cahoon, who died in 2021, was one of merely 23 women elected in the February 1974 election. She wasn't just the first woman to come out as a lesbian whilst an MP, she was the first MP to come out at all. I never met Maureen. She was a trailblazer and never hid who she was, even in the face of some of the worst discrimination, including discrimination from within my own party. A feminist and fierce campaigner for women's rights, Maureen openly stated that her sexuality ruined her political career. Deselected by her local Labour Party in Northampton North, Maureen was reinstated by the National Executive of the Labour Party just before the 1979 election, but ultimately lost her seat as the country went to the polls. But Maureen rightly takes her place in Labour Party history and parliamentary history, and I'm proud that we are able to celebrate her as part of this debate today. But, Mr. Speaker, after Maureen's election in 1974, Parliament would have to wait a staggering 23 years until my honourable friend, the member for Wallasey, who I'm delighted to see has just entered the chamber, became the second out lesbian on these green benches, coming out in 1997. It is thanks to these women trailblazers and those that have come out since that made it possible for me to believe that I could be here too. Living as a lesbian in 2024 is vastly different to living as a lesbian in 1974. And I'm pleased to say that since then, my party and this place has made significant progress with lesbian and LGBT+ rights. I'm glad that progress has been made in recent years, and I welcome the government expanding the scope of the Turing Law to include lesbians who were wrongly convicted of homosexuality while serving in the military. And as a Christian, I am delighted that same-sex couples are finally able to receive blessings from the Church of England. Looking around the world, we see progress in other countries too. 2024 is the year that Greece, Estonia and Latvia are legalising same-sex marriage. And in Dominica, homosexual activity has been decriminalised and the age of consent equalised. But there are challenges too. In Russia, displaying a pride flag has become a criminal offence. And in Uganda, simply identifying as LGBT+ is illegal, showing just how far there is still to go for LGBT+ people, including lesbians, to feel safe to be who they are. And there are still many disparities and discriminations here at home. The government can't seem to decide whether or not to bring forward a bill to ban conversion practices. 2 weeks ago, it was reported that the Prime Minister was killing it off, but a week later, that the Minister for Women and Equalities was still working on it. The position changes depending on whomever was last asked. But the fact remains that the government is still kicking a bill on conversion therapy into the long grass, with no expectation that it will make it to the statute books during this Parliament, despite it being promised 6 years and 4 Tory Prime Ministers ago. Inequality has soared under the Conservatives. 14 years of low growth and their reckless gamble, which cost households thousands, has affected everyone. But women, including lesbians, have been brutally exposed to the cost of living crisis, thanks to a complete failure to close the gender pay gap and a failure to create a working environment that works for women with caring responsibilities. Lesbians and LGBT plus people have been let down by a Conservative government that's killed off its own LGBT action plan, disbanded its LGBT advisory panel, cancelled its international LGBT conference, and has still not honoured that promise to ban the insidious practice of convergent practices. Instead of standing up for LGBT plus rights and bringing people together, the Conservatives have stoked a culture war and pitted different groups against each other. When Labour last left office in 2010, life in Britain for LGBT plus people for lesbians had been completely transformed. It was the last Labour government that repealed the appalling Section 28. Labour who introduced civil partnerships, paving the way for equal marriage. Labour that ended the ban on LGBT people serving in our armed forces. Labour that equalised the age of consent and that gave LGBT couples the right to adopt. Labour that introduced the Equality Act, and Labour that made homophobia a hate crime. I'm proud to take my place here today as a Labour member and a lesbian, with the record of the last Labour government behind me and standing on the shoulders of the brave women and men who made this country a safer and more hospitable place for lesbians and all LGBT plus people to grow up, to work, to love and to thrive. And it is the next Labour government that will continue to build upon this work. Thank you.
Minister Stuart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm glad that the Honourable Lady, the member for Brent Central, said that, pointed out that she wasn't a lesbian. By obviously, I'm not either, and I feel somewhat outnumbered here, but I'm very proud to be able to respond to this important debate today. And firstly, may I extend my thanks to the Honourable Member for Jarrow for securing such an important debate today and for highlighting the importance of Lesbian Visibility Week, and for also paying tribute to Linda Riley, who instigated this in the first place, and I pay tribute to her for her work over many years. It is inspirational people like that that have really made my life as a gay man a lot easier, and I pay tribute to them for standing up at times when it really, really was not easy. I'm extremely proud to be one of over 60 openly LGBT members of Parliament, and I'm grateful to serve alongside such a diverse range of colleagues across this House. Now, as I say, whilst I'm not a lesbian, obviously, the journey of LGBT rights mirrors, in a sense, my lifetime. As I've grown older, our rights have improved significantly over those years, and walking that journey means a great deal to me personally. And I want that journey to continue for future generations. And that's why it is really important that we have this debate on Lesbian Visibility Week, so that people, the next generation, can see that if they are a lesbian, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and you should enjoy your life happily and freely. Lesbian Visibility Week has been widely celebrated since its inception and has provided an essential platform to address both the achievements and the issues faced by lesbians from dedicated colleagues, as other members have mentioned today, such as the first lesbian MP, Maureen Colquhoun, in the 1970s, fighting for gender and racial equality within the Houses of Parliament themselves, to the honourable member for Wallasey, who has been a steadfast campaigner in this place for LGBT rights for many years. I don't want to sound rude. Lots of years. Outside Parliament, there are also inspirational figures such as the Honourable Lady mentioned, Dame Kelly Holmes, who is raising the profile of those that find their true selves in later life. And I was really particularly touched by the contribution from the Honourable Lady from Llanelli. I've heard her story before, and I know that at times it can be incredibly emotional for her, but I'm absolutely honoured every time I'm in the room to hear someone being so open about their experiences and how inspiring that is. The UK is undeniably richer for the contribution of these women, and more LGBT role models continue to appear every day. And others have rightly raised those people, lesbians who have contributed importantly to the way of life in this country, serving in our armed forces, keeping our country safe, serving in medicine and helping us to advance medical advances in this country, and from education to all walks of life. Their contributions have been extraordinary. Many members will have heard me say on numerous occasions that I am committed to improving the outcomes of lesbians and all LGBT people, and we especially recognise that lesbians often face specific challenges. The Honourable Lady for Jarrow talked about how she often felt lonely. And as the Minister for Loneliness, I've been really keen that we've had a specific campaign and focus this year on loneliness experienced by members of the LGBT community, because they so often, and particularly if they're in rural areas, will find that journey incredibly challenging. These challenges also may include difficulty in access to IVF or other issues, including mental health challenges, hate crime, and I was distressed to hear the experiences of honourable members here of the hate crime that they've faced. Having been queer bashed myself, I know how terrifying it is and the lasting effect it has on you. It's not just the incident itself, but years later you have those flashbacks. And of course those who are suffering from domestic abuse. I'd like to reassure all members of the House that myself and other members ministers in the Equality Hub regularly engage with our counterparts across government, as well as relevant civil society groups, on a range of matters that relate to this important area of work. The Equality Hub is working with a range of businesses and professionals currently, professional membership bodies, to identify how employers can best support women's reproductive health in the workplace, for example, as part of the delivery of the workplace elements in the Women's Health Strategy. We are holding round tables and working with employers from a range of sectors to develop case studies and tips on good practice to improve the support available for women's reproductive health. And this will help inform the development of resources to promote and support employer good practice, highlighting those organisations that are leading the way on this issue. There were a number of important points about IVF, and I want to address those. There were a number of changes and future ambitions within that Women's Health Strategy for England to improve the variation in access to NHS-funded fertility services. Colleagues in DHSC have begun work to improve information provision on fertility and fertility treatments, including on the NHS website, and have launched a tool that gives greater transparency of local provision of IVF. Our initial priority is to remove the requirement for female same-sex couples to self-fund 6 rounds of artificial insemination before being able to access NHS-funded treatments. My colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care are working with NHS England to take this forward, along with other commitments that are deliverable through the ICBs. Now, I accept that this is taking longer than expected, which I realise is disappointing to those affected, but please be assured it remains a priority for delivery. And NICE is also currently reviewing its fertility guidelines and will consider whether the current recommendations for access to NHS-funded treatments are still appropriate, and we expect that review to be published next year. With regard to the SI, I'm assured that colleagues within the Department for Health are working on that SI to present to the House, but I will update the Honourable Lady when I've had further discussions with ministers in the Health Department. I also wanted to come on to some of the other points that were raised by members today. Members have mentioned the equal marriage debate that we had here. I remember ahead of that debate people thinking that, or us receiving emails and letters from people almost suggesting that if we extended marriage to lesbian and gay couples, that the next day the sky would fall in. Well, we did it. The sky is still up there, absolutely. What I noticed, though, was very quickly everybody was waiting for their invitation to an equal marriage reception. Also, on the issue of hate crime, as I mentioned, I really do think that we need to ensure that we all call out, and I'm glad honourable members have, any hate crime that has been happening. I am in regular discussions with my colleagues in the Home Office and will continue to raise the points that honourable members have mentioned today. The Honourable Lady for Edinburgh South West talked about the voices of lesbians and being silenced. I simply cannot understand why anybody would want to do that. Lesbians have as much right as anyone to stand up for recognition and for their rights. It is important that we all enter this challenging debate in a calm and measured way. A toxic debate serves no one. We can have a grown-up debate, we can disagree and we can agree, but we can do that with dignity and respect. And as my honourable friend, the member for South Ribble, said, it should absolutely all be about the people we love. So let love be at the centre of that debate. Also, on the issue of international issues, I was really glad that colleagues had raised that. There are some unacceptable things happening around the world. When we look at Uganda and Ghana, I'm almost repeating the Honourable Lady is saying, and I may pay tribute to the work the all-party group is doing to focus attention on this. It is right that we join our LGBT Alliance friends around the world who have made progress in encouraging progress in those countries too, so that people do not live in fear. I will address the issue of conversion practices that the Honourable Lady mentioned. No one in this country should be harmed or harassed for who they are, and attempts at so-called conversion practices are abhorrent. And we're clear on our stance that they are harmful and they simply do not work. And that's why we are committed to publishing the draft bill. I know it's taken time, but it's been a very challenging issue to get right, and I am committed to us doing it. I would also just gently point out I was slightly disappointed by the Honourable Lady's conclusions to her speech, trying to make out that this government has not worked hard on LGBT issues. I am proud to serve in a government that introduced equal marriage. I am proud to serve in a government that has brought about an HIV action plan to eradicate new infections by 2030. I am proud to serve in a government that allows gay men to donate blood, and I'm proud to serve in a government that instigated the Veterans Review so that there can be more support for those who were treated disgracefully. Today, though, I'll end on a positive note by thanking the Honourable Member again for Jarrow for securing this debate today and bringing awareness to the extremely important topic of our lesbian citizens during this important Lesbian Visibility Week. As outlined, the Government is committed to making sure that the UK is a safe place where lesbians are given the opportunities to thrive and live a safe and happy life.
Kate Osborne to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to all of those who have contributed today. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Edinburgh West, who's no longer in her place, for all that she did to ensure same-sex marriage was achieved. My huge thanks to the Honourable Member, my friend from Brent Central, I'm so sorry, for her continuous support and allyship And to the honourable member for Llanelli, and I hope that that sounds somewhere near the right pronunciation, for her activism and her very moving contribution today. It was disappointing to hear the SNP front bench spokesperson using problematic language like deluded and false teaming in a debate designed to celebrate all lesbians, to bring so much hate and toxicity as the formal front bench speaker is upsetting, and this Parliament deserves better.
Excuse me. The honourable lady really must not use language like that, and I think she should withdraw that comment. Kate Osborne.
I'm not sure which bit you would like me to withdraw, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Referring to hate language.
OK, I withdraw it. But it's astonishing to claim that Lesbian Visibility Week is marginalising lesbians. It's because of Lesbian Visibility Week that we are here, bringing the issues facing lesbians to Parliament. The reality is trans-inclusive lesbians, like me, are very much the majority of cis lesbians. So I take offence at any insinuation that I am marginalising or misrepresenting lesbians. As a cis lesbian, I will not shy away from my trans-inclusive lesbianism and feminism. This year's theme is unified, not uniform, and to embrace this, we should all be celebrating the wonderful diversity amongst the spectrum of LGBTQIA+ women. I'd like to thank the government spokesperson for the constructive contribution that he made, for the support for the LGBTQIA community, and I look forward to receiving his response regarding IVF. Also like to thank the front bench spokesperson for Labour for setting out that Labour will treat all LGBTQIA+ people fairly and with dignity and respect. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it.